He walked into a faded Kansas City hotel craving anonymity, only to hear the night receptionist fluently switch from Italian to Mandarin, lighting a fuse he couldn't ignore. Hours later, a sealed letter slid across her desk, promised a full ride to Johns Hopkins and a post in Geneva, shattering a decade of quiet sacrifice in a single breath. And before dawn, the mysterious guest vanished, leaving nothing but the handwritten words, "This isn't charity, it's a correction." Hi, everyone. Today we're starting with a moment so quiet, so ordinary, you might walk right past it. A man walks into a modest hotel in Kansas City. He's not looking for headlines. He's not running from scandal. He's just tired. But in that worn-out lobby under dim lights and the hum of an old vending machine, something happens that'll change two lives and maybe ripple out a little further than that. This could happen to anyone, even you. So before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're watching from and what time is it right now. Let's begin. The front doors of the Harper Row Inn opened with a slow hydraulic hiss that felt more like a whisper than a welcome. Noah Whitaker, 51 years old, entered with nothing but a small rolling suitcase and the kind of tired that doesn't come from jet lag. It comes from too many years of giving too much to people who already have everything. Noah wasn't a man who looked like he needed rest. Tall, composed with salt and pepper hair, and the shoulders of someone who once believed in solving problems with clean equations. But lately even numbers felt noisy. He hadn't told his board he was leaving for a week. He hadn't told the press team at his foundation. He just told his assistant, "Find me someplace simple. No rooftop lounges, no key cards that cost more than dinner." And so here he was, Kansas City, Missouri, early spring, cool air, a hotel that had once been something grand back in the 70s, now quietly doing its job with no fuss. The first thing he noticed wasn't the lobby. It wasn't the worn beige carpet or the fake ficus in the corner. It was the voice. "Buonasera, signora. Sì, colazione è servita dalle 7 alle 10. Italian. Not just basic tourist phrases, fluid, natural practiced. Then Wanying Nin, Rugonin Shuyao Bangju, Chingaosu wo Mandarin. And finally Karibu. Nimekuekea Chumba Chenye, Mwangasa Zaidi. Swahili." Noah slowed his step. He wasn't eavesdropping, he just hadn't expected it. The woman behind the desk stood tall, her posture relaxed but purposeful. Mid-30s maybe. Smooth brown skin. Her braids were tied back in a neat low bun, and her badge simply read M. Hale. She was helping a couple with 2 kids and a grandmother who clearly didn't speak English. But it wasn't just the words, it was the way she used them. Calm, no ego. No need to show off, just helpful. Precise. When it was finally his turn, she turned to him with a warm, almost reserved smile. "Checking in, yes, Noah Whitaker. Should be under that name." She tapped on the keyboard, her movements confident and quick. "Room 213. 2 nights. Late checkout requested. Credit card on file. Would you like bottled water sent up?" He blinked. Sure. That'd be great." She handed him a small envelope. "Elevator is just past the sitting area. Room 215 is on the 2nd floor." He hesitated. "Can I ask, how many languages do you speak?" She met his eyes, not proudly, not shyly, just factually. 3 fluently, 2 conversational, and 1 I'm still learning." He nodded, impressed. "Did you study formally? Some, but mostly self-taught. Podcasts, library books, YouTube. I used to want to work in diplomacy. Life had other plans." Something in her tone was soft, but finished like a sentence she didn't want to open again. Noah gave a quiet nod, stepped aside. But instead of heading to the elevator, he sat in one of the faded armchairs near the window. Watched her as she checked in a man with a grumpy toddler, then answered a call in French. He'd spent years talking to supposed experts. People with MBAs and big salaries. People who could pitch big ideas but couldn't hold a room the way she did. This woman, she had presence. The kind of presence that couldn't be taught. And yet here she was behind a desk that buzzed when you pressed the bell too hard. That night Noah couldn't sleep, not because of the bed or the noise, but because something about her wouldn't leave his mind. He stared at the ceiling of room 213, the hum of the hallway ice machine just loud enough to be a distraction. He'd met thousands of professionals in his lifetime, CEOs, innovators, Ivy League graduates, and none of them had made him pause the way she did. Not out of pity, not even admiration, just recognition. It stayed with him. At 6 a.m., he got up, threw on a navy quarter-zip and jeans, and went downstairs. She wasn't there. The day shift receptionist, older, sleepy-eyed, barely looked up when he walked by. So he waited, took his coffee, sat near the window again. She didn't walk in until after 2. Same bun, different sweater, head held high. She was resetting the front desk when she spotted him. "You're still here?" she asked, a little amused. "Meeting got pushed," he replied. "Figured I'd stay another night." She nodded, already typing. "Want me to extend your reservation?" He hesitated. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk." Her hands paused. "Talk about what you said yesterday. The languages, your background." I couldn't stop thinking about it. There was a beat of quiet. Then she said, "I get off in 30 minutes. There's a sandwich shop across the street. It's not glamorous, but they have decent tea." Noah smiled. Perfect. The sandwich shop across the street wasn't anything fancy. It had chipped tile floors, a chalkboard menu with half-erased specials, and the kind of fluorescent lights that hum softly in the background, like a tired sigh. But it was warm. It smelled like toasted rye and brewed chamomile. And when Marina Hale sat across from Noah Whitaker, she looked just as composed as she had behind the front desk, except now her voice carried something gentler. She wrapped her fingers around a ceramic mug steam, rising lazily as she blew on the tea. "I don't usually do this," she said, and Noah could tell she meant it. "I appreciate that you are," he replied. There was a brief pause filled only by the scrape of cutlery and a family laughing at a booth nearby. Then, without prompting, she began. "I was 24 when my father had the stroke," Marina said. "I was halfway through a master's program in linguistics at NYU. I had a scholarship, part-time work, tutoring international students. I thought I was on track to join the Foreign Service. Had the exams scheduled and everything." Noah listened closely, not just with his ears, but with his posture, with his stillness. He didn't interrupt. "My mom had passed the year before," she continued. "When Dad collapsed, there was no one else. My little sister was still in college. So I withdrew, packed up my life, and moved back here. Took a job, then another, then the hotel." Noah leaned in slightly. "And the languages, I couldn't let them go." "I don't know why," she said with a small shrug. "Every time I thought I should give up, I'd hear a phrase in Portuguese or a clip in Tagalog, and it would pull me back in. I guess I never stopped hoping, just stopped planning." Noah nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's a kind of discipline most people never find." "It's not discipline," Marina said quietly. "It's survival. When you're used to standing in the background unnoticed, you start building things inside yourself just to prove you're still growing." There was something about the way she said that. Calm, not bitter, not even sad. "Just true, I see it," he said. "That quiet kind of excellence. It sticks with you." Marina looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "Most people don't." "Not really." "Well," Noah replied, "most people are too busy listening for noise to recognize substance." They shared a small smile, the kind that only forms when two strangers realize they aren't strangers anymore. "So what do you do?" she asked, finally turning the question on him. "Retired engineer," he said, then paused. "Now I run a foundation that funds energy access and education projects. Renewable tech, scholarships, quiet work, not flashy." Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "That doesn't sound quiet." He chuckled. "It can be, especially when you're trying to do it without turning people into PR stories." Marina stirred her tea, thinking. "And what brings you here?" He looked out the window, watching cars roll down the street in slow waves. "I guess I got tired of hearing the same voices in the same rooms. I wanted to be reminded of who we forget." She tilted her head. "And you found that at a 2-star hotel off I-70, I found you." The words weren't romantic, but they landed with weight. Marina didn't reply immediately. She stared down at her cup. When she looked up, her voice had softened. "Do you know what it feels like to be excellent at something and still invisible?" Noah answered without hesitation. "Yes. And I know what it feels like to watch people with less conviction and less grit walk into opportunities because of polish." They sat with that for a moment. "Have you ever thought of going back to school?" he asked. Marina laughed softly. Every day, but life doesn't make space for it. I've got a niece in 5th grade. My sister's a nurse on the night shift. I cover mornings and evenings. I have a system. A system that works, Noah said, but doesn't feed your soul. She smiled, but it was tired. That's one way to put it. Noah leaned back in his chair. You're not just talented. You're trained. That's rare. I'm not trained. Not officially. Don't mistake a lack of certification for a lack of value. They didn't talk about dreams after that. They talked about language. How you could hear someone's sorrow in the way they hesitated over vowels. How the same sentence in Arabic or French could carry a completely different rhythm, a completely different soul. Marina came alive talking about that. Noah could see it. Her hands moved more. Her eyes lit up. She was for the first time in what might have been years simply being the person she had once trained herself to become. And when they finished lunch, she stood up first. I should get back. He nodded, standing too. Thank you for lunch. She gave him a small smile. You're welcome. It was good. He watched her cross the street. The hotel doors opened automatically, and she stepped inside like nothing had changed. But something had. Noah didn't walk back right away. He sat in the sandwich shop for a few more minutes, took out his phone, typed a message to someone in his foundation team. Do we still have private fellowship slots available this cycle? I might have a candidate. The reply came 10 minutes later. If you vouch for them, we'll make room. Noah didn't rush. That wasn't his way. He didn't move on instinct. He moved on certainty. But by the time he stepped back into his hotel room that afternoon, he knew. He had seen the kind of potential that doesn't flash like lightning. It burns slow and steady, the kind that lights up rooms people never expect you to enter. He opened his laptop and logged into the internal portal for the Whitaker Educational Fund, a branch of his foundation rarely touched unless something truly rare came along. Most applicants came from polished networks, Ivy League campuses, prestigious referrals, curated resumes. That wasn't what this was. Marina had none of that polish. But she had something else: consistency, humility, brilliance without a platform. He drafted an email to Laurel Chang, his director of fellowship programs. Candidate Marina Hale. Position custom private fellowship. Goal fully funded MA in International Relations, Johns Hopkins preferred. Secondary cultural diplomacy internship, Geneva early next year. No press, no publicity. She's not to be turned into a story. This is not charity. This is correction. Laurel's reply came 2 hours later. If she's what you say she is, we'll fast-track everything. Need some basic documents, transcript if available, background form, and a signature. I'll get the Geneva team ready for placement. You sure about this? He was sure. But there was one more thing to handle. He picked up the phone and made a quiet call to an old friend, Thomas Devreux, now stationed in the U.S. mission in Geneva. Thomas, he said, when the line picked up, you ever take an intern without the traditional path? There was a pause. You mean one without a silver spoon? Something like that. What are we talking, language skills? Personality? All of the above. Plus the kind of restraint most diplomats never learn. Tomas exhaled slowly. You've never made a personal request in 10 years. I'm making one now. I'll talk to the cultural attaché. Get something open-ended. When do you want her here? 6 months if she's willing. Send me the details. If you say she's real, that's enough for me. Noah ended the call and sat still for a long moment. He wasn't trying to change her life. That wasn't his style. He was just removing barriers. Quietly, completely. Giving her the kind of access that should have been hers all along. But now came the hardest part, not telling her. He didn't want her to feel indebted. This wasn't about ego and people like Marina. They'd had enough broken promises. Enough next times. He didn't want her gratitude. He just wanted her momentum. The next day she was back at the front desk, same grace, same smile. He passed her on the way out, coffee in hand. You're headed out, she asked. Just for a walk, he said. Wanted to get some air before my flight. She nodded. Well, safe travels. He paused. If I said, you're too good for this place, would that insult you? No, she said after a beat. It would just remind me what I used to believe. He nodded once. Then let me say it because it's true. She didn't ask what he meant, just smiled. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. Noah, he corrected. Noah, she echoed softly. And that was it. 3 days later, Marina Hale stood behind the same counter, sorting room keys and checking messages when her cell buzzed in her pocket. Unknown number. Area code 202, Washington, D.C. She hesitated, glanced around, then stepped into the office behind the desk. Hello, a calm voice replied. Miss Hale, this is Laurel Cheng with the Whitaker Educational Fund. I'm calling to notify you that you've been nominated for a private academic fellowship to attend Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. The offer includes full tuition, housing, travel, and a living stipend. There was silence on the line. I didn't apply for anything, Marina said, almost whispering. You didn't have to, Laurel replied. Your name was submitted by a private sponsor who's requested anonymity. He believes in his words that this is not a gift. It's a correction. Marina sat down slowly in the office chair, hands trembling. Is this real? Yes. You'll receive the full offer by courier within 48 hours. There's also an internship placement waiting in Geneva. You have a week to consider, but we hope you'll accept. The call ended. The air felt too thick to breathe. She didn't tell anyone right away. Not her sister, not her niece, not her co-workers. She just went home that night, sat at the kitchen table, and waited for the envelope. When it arrived, thick cream color bearing the raised seal of the foundation, she tore it open like it might disappear. Inside was the full offer, and tucked inside on heavy stationery, a handwritten note, Marina. This is not a gift. This is long overdue. You don't need permission to be extraordinary. You already are. N. She pressed the note to her chest. She didn't cry, not right away. But when she looked in the mirror that night, really looked, she didn't just see the night shift receptionist anymore. She saw the woman she once believed she could become. And maybe, just maybe, she still could. The tram pulled into Gare Cornavin just after 7:10 a.m. sharp. The streets of Geneva still glistened from last night's rain, and the morning air had that alpine crispness that made even city traffic feel quiet. As the doors hissed open, Marina Hale stepped down onto the platform with a navy blue tote over her shoulder and a neat leather folder clutched in her arms. Her coat wasn't expensive, her shoes weren't designer, but she walked with the poise of someone who had earned every inch of ground beneath her feet. 6 months earlier, she'd been wiping down brochures at the front desk of a budget hotel in Kansas City. Now she was reporting to the Cultural Affairs Division of the U.S. Mission in Geneva. The apartment she'd found, barely 400 square feet, was just a 12-minute tram ride from the embassy. Small, yes, but with sunlight that streamed through the windows, like grace itself. She'd bought herself a cheap kettle and a second-hand set of French flashcards she didn't really need, but found comforting anyway. That morning, Marina arrived 15 minutes early for her first day. The security guards checked her badge, nodded politely, and buzzed her into a lobby so modern it gleamed. Steel, glass, everything polished. Voices floated through the space, French, German, English. She took a deep breath, held it, let it go. Inside the briefing room, 10 other interns were already seated. Most wore crisp blazers and shoes that hadn't seen a single scuff. She recognized the names of 2 Ivy League schools just by glancing at their lanyards. Nobody looked her way. Not rudely, just habit, like someone blending in too well with the background. She sat at the far end of the table, back straight, hands folded. Then the door opened and Noah Whitaker walked in. He didn't look like a CEO, no designer suit, no entourage. Just a charcoal sweater, slacks, and that quiet steadiness that had always defined him. Good morning, he said, not as an announcement, but as a greeting. Some of you may know me. Most of you probably don't. That's fine. I'm not here to be impressive. I'm here to listen, to support, and to stay out of your way while you do something meaningful. Marina kept her eyes low, but she could feel his presence. He glanced her way just briefly, but didn't linger. Didn't name her, didn't acknowledge the months of work he'd put into getting her here. And somehow that was the most generous thing he could have done. After the meeting, while the others circled around an espresso machine and compared syllabi, she lingered, waited, let the room empty. Then she stepped toward him. You knew I'd be here, she said softly. I hoped, he replied. I didn't expect you to walk in like that. I don't make a habit of it, Noah said, but I wanted to be sure you saw the room, that it's yours now. You built this, she said. No, he corrected. You did. I just made the door easier to open. Marina looked at him for a long time. Why me? His eyes didn't waver. Because I've met hundreds of people with access and no purpose. You had purpose before you ever had access, and that matters. She didn't cry, not even close. But something inside her steadied like a root finally touching soil. The weeks passed quickly after that. She wasn't the loudest. She wasn't the most polished. But she was the one people came to when they needed precision, when a diplomatic memo had to be translated with emotional nuance, not just accuracy, when a cultural briefing required sensitivity, not statistics. And slowly her presence started to shift the room. She became known not for where she came from, but for what she brought to the table. One afternoon, a fellow intern named Julian Arnaud leaned over during a lunch break and said, "You don't act like someone who just got here." She smiled, not turning. That's because I didn't just get here. I've been preparing for this for a long time. And she had. Every language workbook on that Kansas City bus, every podcast she barely understood, every late night at the hotel desk repeating conjugations under her breath while folding spare blankets. All of it, every quiet, unpaid, unseen effort, was finally rising to the surface. She sent postcards to her niece Rena every 2 weeks, told her about Swiss chocolate, the different sounds of French dialects, and how the embassy building smelled like old books and new ambition. But she didn't mention Noah. Not because she was hiding anything, but because this chapter wasn't about him. It was hers now. Still, the weight of his gesture never left her. She thought of it when she entered rooms where no one expected her to lead. She thought of it when she paused to help a struggling intern from Montenegro, gently correcting his phrasing in English, never embarrassing him. She thought of it when she stayed late to revise a briefing memo, not because it was assigned to her, but because she couldn't stand letting something be halfway done. Because that's what Noah had seen, not just her potential, but her quiet refusal to leave things unfinished. The city became part of her rhythm. Saturday walks along Lake Geneva, coffee from the same corner vendor each morning. She began to learn German phrases, helped an embassy staffer write a condolence letter in Swahili, learned the tram routes by heart, and one evening after a long week of work, she sat at her tiny desk with the window cracked open just enough to hear the street below and began typing a post. Not a resume, not a bio, just her truth. You never know who's paying attention. I spent years behind a hotel front desk thinking no one saw me. One guest did. He changed the course of my life. Not with noise, not with credit, just with action. So if you're working quietly, don't stop. Speak with purpose, even when no one seems to listen. She stared at the screen for a full minute, then hit post. By morning, it had been shared over 1,000 times. The post that Marina tapped out in the hush of her tiny studio spread faster than she could refresh the screen. By the time she stepped onto the tram the next morning, her phone was vibrating so often it felt like a second heartbeat. And by lunch, the simple reflection on being noticed had found its way onto Embassy Intranet's language learning forums and even a Kansas City local newsfeed that still remembered the Harper Row Inn. Strangers wrote to say they were studying for the GED between warehouse shifts, that they were exchanging bedtime TikTok for Duolingo minutes, that they finally believed night work and big dreams could coexist until the right door opened. Marina answered as many messages as she could on that first dizzy evening, thanking, encouraging, promising nothing except that quiet effort mattered. And then she silenced the notifications, boiled a cup of mint tea in her thrift store kettle, and forced herself to finish the policy summary due the next day. Because viral or not, the cables still needed translating. Word drifted through embassy halls that someone on the intern roster was internet famous, but most colleagues were too busy to dig deeper, and Marina preferred it that way. She slipped back into rhythm morning tram security checkpoint, quick hello to the receptionist in French down the corridor that always smelled faintly of new carpet, to a seat where she could keep doing the work that justified the opportunity in the first place. A week later, while double-checking the tone of a condolence letter in Italian, she felt a presence behind her and turned to see Noah holding 2 steaming paper cups from the same street vendor who burned coffee just enough to make it taste like home. He offered 1 cup without a word, and she accepted both of them, letting the steam do the talking. Finally, he said, "You wrote something true," and she answered, "It was never about me." And he shook his head, replying, "It was always about everyone who thinks no one sees them. Truth travels fast when it's been waiting a long time." 2 days after that coffee, Marina found a timid knock on her cubicle wall. The knock belonged to Arta Veliu, a 22-year-old cultural studies graduate from Albania, whose English was formal on paper but brittle in conversation, and whose confidence had been eroded by a supervisor who corrected her loudly in meetings. Arta asked if Marina might, if it wasn't too much trouble, glance over a draft proposal she was terrified to submit. Marina remembered standing frozen over her own application essays years ago, so she pushed aside her notes and invited Arta to sit, then spent the next hour smoothing sentences, swapping rigid textbook phrases for words that breathed. Afterward, Arta said, "I don't know how to repay you," and Marina smiled with that same composed grace that once captivated Noah, answering, "You will just not to me pass it on when you see someone else hesitating." Within a month, Arta's proposal was not only accepted but highlighted in a staff newsletter, and Marina watched the younger woman straighten her posture inch by inch. Each day, proof that recognition is contagious when shared properly. The mentoring didn't stop there. She started a lunchtime language circle on Wednesdays, open to any intern who wanted help untangling idioms or practicing diplomatic courtesy in Japanese. The conference room filled quickly, not because the interns needed extra credit, but because Marina's table felt safe, free of performance grading, focused on collective rise. One afternoon, she passed out sticky notes labeled small victories and asked everyone to scribble yesterday's proudest quiet moment, then stick it to the whiteboard. By the end of the hour, the board was a mosaic of sentences like, "Explain tariff policy without stumbling," and "Didn't apologize for asking a question." Tiny testimonies shining brighter together than alone. Noah watched the ripple with characteristic distance. He never spoke of the fellowship in board meetings, never highlighted Marina's success in annual reports, but the effect of her presence crept into his language. During a strategy session, he challenged the team to fund people who study in silence. And when someone asked for metrics, he said, "Measure the doors we open, not the applause we get." A few skeptics muttered about unverifiable impact until Noah quietly pointed them to the Language Circle's video call, where interns from 4 continents practiced Swahili greetings, reminding everyone that soft power often starts with soft voices. At the next quarterly review, he approved a pilot program titled Quiet Excellence Grants, aimed at workers pursuing professional dreams outside formal pipelines. The committee raised eyebrows at first until they read testimonials from Marina's Wednesday circle and realized they were witnessing the prototype in real time. Still, Noah avoided personal credit, like a draft in the hallway content to see the architecture hold without his name on the cornerstone. On a misty Friday evening in late spring, Marina left the mission after a 14-hour day of back-to-back cultural briefings and stepped into a city lit gold by street lamps. She could have bussed home, but she walked instead, listening to the multilingual chatter that floated from sidewalk cafes. Halfway across Pont de Bergue, she paused, remembering how the Missouri River looked from the bus window during dawn rides to the hotel, how the horizon back then felt like a glass ceiling. Now the water beneath her reflected the Hotel de la Paix and the distant Alps, and she realized ceilings only stay overhead if we forget to look for skylights. Noah's handwritten line, "This isn't charity, it's correction," echoed again. But tonight she heard it differently. It no longer defined a debt, it defined a standard. She promised herself to keep the same anonymity for the next person to lift without spotlight, to correct quietly. The following Monday, she drafted a confidential memo proposing a low-profile internship slot reserved for applicants from non-traditional backgrounds. She signed it simply M. Hale Intern, then slid it into her supervisor's inbox with no fanfare. Policy would move slowly, but the seed was in the soil. Weeks later, during a reception for visiting educators, Marina spotted Noah speaking with 2 ambassadors beside a display of Kansas City barbecue sauce, an homage he had insisted on including as an icebreaker. He caught her eye, raised his glass of sparkling water in a silent salute, and she answered with a nod that said everything. "Thank you, I'm still me, and I'm bringing others through." No speeches followed, no stage photos. The music carried on, the chatter filled the marble hall. And if anyone wondered why, a retired engineer and a former night receptionist shared a moment of perfect understanding, they never asked. Some stories, after all, do their best work unheard by the crowd. And that, friends, is where our journey settles into the soft glow after the spotlight dims into the gentle hush that follows a long crescendo of possibility. Think back on Noah's first weary step into that Kansas City lobby, on Marina's effortless shift between Italian warmth and Mandarin courtesy, on the quiet lunch where regrets met resilience, and on the silent paperwork that turned a hotel desk into a launch pad. None of it arrived wrapped in fanfare. None of it required a grand stage. Yet the impact traveled farther than any press release could chase. If this story leaves you with one lingering note, let it be: this recognition is a form of justice, and justice begins wherever someone chooses to look twice and believe what they see. So maybe tonight, as you rinse dinner plates or set an alarm for the early shift, consider the people who pass through your day, unseen: the cashier practicing English under her breath, the Vietnam vet reading history at the library, the grandchild translating for grandparents at the clinic. Offer them patience, a question asked with genuine interest, a comment that calls out the talent shining through the routine. It won't make headlines, but it might open a door you'll never even witness. And if you are the one studying at midnight, brewing coffee to stay awake, wondering whether your effort matters, remember Marina's reflection on that bridge in Geneva: ceilings hold only when we agree to stop looking for sky. Keep studying, keep refining, keep showing up, because someone is closer than you think to noticing. And when they do, you'll be ready to walk through. Until then, let your quiet excellence be its own applause, steady and sure, echoing in places where tomorrow's doors are already being built.